Hello, everybody, and welcome to Behind the Scenes, podcast where we talk about the intersection of art, culture, big ideas. I'm your host, Sean Malone, the creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education and creator of Out of Frame, video essay series on YouTube. Just dropped a video today, in fact. But here today with me, as usual, is Jen Maffasanti, the director of communications for the Libertas Institute in Utah, but not joining us today, Paul Nelson, who is out sick with the Rona and his entire family, I think. So they're all dealing with that today.
Been there. It sucks.
Yeah, it's funny. I'd say it's going around, but you're quite a ways away from Paul, so I don't think you're to blame.
I don't think I gave it to him. No,
in this case,
that'd be a heck of a thing.
Yeah, it'd be pretty impressive. I think you could, But look, in the sort of roundabout way that we're completely divorcing sanity and personal responsibility from the way that we think about people's actions. You, having had COVID, probably did give it to someone else, who gave it to someone else, who gave it to someone else, who, at some point may have given it to somebody relatively near Georgia, who gave it to somebody who gave it to Paul. So it's your fault.
Could be. It is my fault.
Obviously.
It's my fault. I'm so sorry, Paul. Feel free to blame me.
Yeah. I mean, because... Yeah. Absolutely, if you get sick, you should feel bad about it because you're a bad person, apparently.
Bad person.
Oh, my goodness. Well, anyway, we wish Paul, Paul's not feeling super well today, but he will be joining us probably next week, and hopefully that will be all good. But in the meantime, we're going to be talking about a show today that I started watching a few weeks ago and then kind of bailed on, and then everybody kept talking about it, so we came back to it. But we're going to be talking about Arcane, which is the League of Legends show that's on Netflix right now. Jen, what were some of your first impressions of Arcane?
I mean, it would probably have been a little cooler. A lot of the world building probably would have made more sense to me if I'd had the first idea what League of Legends is about.
I have that problem, 100%.
But I will say that all things considered, I didn't have to know anything about League of Legends to understand what was happening in this show. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like if you have a little bit of a familiarity and sort of a basis in, I don't know, kind of steampunky worlds, I think you can kind of get it, like this intersection of science and magic kind of stuff that, we kind of get in this universe. And I'm pretty familiar with that. I know you're pretty familiar with that. I mean, there's a lot of tropes in here that are not too outside of what I'm pretty used to. I didn't know who any of the characters were going in. I didn't really know what any of their motivations were. And I do think that probably affected my appreciation of the show, because I didn't particularly like any of the characters. And I think that if I had been playing them in a video game for a while, I might have had a different level of attachment to them coming in. But I did not.
Yeah, probably. I can get on board with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's do the plot real quick. So we won't get into spoilers just yet. We'll get into spoilers a little bit later. Just the plot basically is a thieving crew robs a penthouse apartment where, basically they're just trying to steal stuff for money. They don't have any particular knowledge of what's in there, but the youngest member of the crew, oh my gosh, what's her name? Powder. I was going to call her Jinx. She's not Jinx yet. The youngest member of the crew ends up kind of sneaking her way into a back room and finding this weird blue orb, little balls. She takes a sack of these things, and on her way out, she drops one of them or a couple of them. And, unbeknownst to anybody, up until this point, these things just explode and destroy this whole building. And so, that kind of kicks off this mystery of what are these things and whatever. In the second episode, we jump into sort of the other side of this same event, which is the guy who owns the apartment or staying in the apartment is actually just on the other side of the door coming back in. And what we realize is that he is he's a scientist in his world who is experimenting with arcane magic and trying to create technology that incorporates a magical power source, which is run by these kind of orbs. And he's doing it off the books because their world controls access to technology, access to resources, access to all that stuff. And they basically have a science council that dictates what is or is not allowed to be studied. And so this is one of these things that is not allowed. So he's doing it at home instead of at the university where he works and where he's a student. And so anyway, a lot of the rest of this sort of revolves around what is going on politically in this world, what is going on with the arcane magic stuff that's happening in this world. The technology that they're developing is a whole point of plot and everything else. And then also all of these characters, because this explosion is surprising, but it also introduces an element where people actually want they want this stuff so that they can use it for their own benefit. There's some other magic that gets involved. I don't know if we call the potion stuff. Is that magic? I'm not really sure.
I mean, I think it kind of is.
Yes.
Shimmer is the name of the drug. It's just referred to as like a street drug.
Yeah, it's basically, yeah.
But it does cause like really significant, I don't know, deformations, like physical deformations,
right?
Yeah,
like
mutations, physical mutations.
I guess, but it's like it's also like it's being extracted from this like mutated worm dragon thing. By the way, did you see? So there's this dragon thing that's sort of, I guess, the basis of Shimmer. I guess this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. But like it's Toothless, but like an ugly version of Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. So that kind of amused me. It's like these huge giant eyes and kind of rounded face and little flappy ears, and the whole thing pretty much they could have just taken the model and then made it blotchy and pink, basically. And
I mean, kind of.
There you go. But anyway, it's an interesting show. I think what a lot of people have responded to really positively about it is its art style, which is a kind of an interesting blend of 2D and 3D animation, and it's neat. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of a lot of it, but I will say that like the technique of the animation was really good, and I think a lot of the animation, I would say this, I would certainly enjoy seeing more shows done in this style, or at least using some of the same techniques.
Yeah.
There are elements of character design and stuff like that I don't really care that much about, and some of the animation gets a little weird. But in the way that for me it just gets a little bit video gamey. And that's what I kind of don't love about it. Like a lot of it has a little bit of a video game cutscene feel to it. And in fact, I think some of the storytelling is done in a way that reminds me of a little bit video gaming. One of the things I was mentioning to Jen before we started was there's a lot of montages in the show, and they do a lot of like, what I'll basically call music videos. They take like a very current pop song, and they will put that as the basis for a 3-minute montage. And it feels like cutscenes to me. It feels like we're like, okay, we're going to jump ahead in the story here, but you're just going to get a quick montage. And they don't always connect directly to the events that you just experienced. So it could be like, it'll be a montage, but it'll suddenly like pull in from other parts of the world and stuff. And so I don't know. I mean, some of it for me, I found a little bit hard to get into, but Jen, how did you feel about, I mean, were you like engaged the whole time? Like, did you like a lot of the characters, the story?
I mean, yeah, I was pretty engaged the whole time. The aesthetic of it was really cool and slick. And like, I really appreciated a lot of the interesting like Art Deco architecture pieces and stuff like that. That was really cool to me. I'm a big fan of that, as listeners will remember when we talked about Legend of Korra years ago. But yeah, it looked really cool. I watched pretty much all of it over the course of a weekend, so I was able to to dedicate a fair amount of attention to it, more than I would have if I was trying to knock this out over a few weeknights. But so I didn't get particularly lost in the montage scenes or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say I think I said this at the beginning. I watched the first 4 or 5 episodes, 4 episodes, 4.5 really. And then I stopped watching it for a couple weeks, and then we came back to it once we started talking about watching again.
Yeah, so. I see how that would be, an obstacle to remembering all of the things that are happening.
I think some of it. Well, go on.
And the world does feel pretty rich, pretty fleshed out. There's clearly some lore there that I'm not particularly privy to, but that's okay because it wasn't relevant to the actual story that they were telling in the show.
Yeah, it exists in a single, like the setting is a single city, and like Piltover, I think is the name of the city, and yet you get a lot of indications that this city is far from the only one in the world, and in fact, there's probably a lot of dangers in the wider world. Piltover seems like kind of a beacon of science and progress and all this stuff that maybe doesn't exist in a lot of the other parts of the world. And then you end up getting another character who's the mother of a character that we introduced to earlier in the series, who clearly comes from another location. She comes from another country. And, so you get a sense of like, there's a bigger world happening here. And I think the show did pretty well. I assume that there's going to be a season 2. I mean, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen it.
It's looking that way. It's going to be like next year sometime, I think.
Have they announced
anything? I think I saw a headline just today.
Okay.
That it would be next year.
I figured it. Honestly, it would be really surprising to me if they didn't do a season 2 at this point. And honestly, it's one of the only shows that I've seen in the last year or two that a sizable portion of our audience base actually seem to care about. So like for Out of Frame, I've actually seen a lot of people, and there's other people that tend to have very critical and negative reviews about stuff. Critical Drinker being like one who's very, very positive about Arcane. So I don't know. I think that it's probably going to be fairly popular among kind of a 20-year-old demographic, teens and early 20s. And I liked it. I liked it more as it went on, but I did not particularly care for it at the beginning. And part of it honestly was fatigue of seeing shows that are about people doing bad stuff. And so the show opens with a bunch of thieves. And look, they're supposed to be sort of scrappy street urchins, and they're whatever, they're living, they're not part of high society in this world. And you'll go through and you'll see that the government is very, very detached from the rest of the world. There's clearly a ruling class. There's clearly an upper crust that is sort of making decisions for literally everyone else. And it's very oligarchical and all of that kind of stuff. So I get it. I mean, they and then also, like, I guess as you kind of get into the story more, you kind of learn that this sort of undercity thing is really where all these people who started a rebellion many, many years ago kind of live and kind of hide out in anonymity and obscurity or whatever. And, they were the losers of a civil war, right? So I'm supposed to kind of feel something for these kids, but I kind of don't. And also I'm really annoyed that the first thing I see of them is that they're stealing somebody's stuff. And because I don't know anything about who they're stealing from. And by the way, it turns out that the guy that they're stealing from isn't really a bad guy. He's not somebody who stole a bunch of stuff himself. In fact, he was working outside of the law on his own because he was a victim of bad policy, restrictive policy. Right. So I liked him better. So I like the Jace is the character who owns this, or I think he's just staying in the penthouse apartment because he's actually poor. He's from, not the upper crust, whatever, but he's been, he's got a patron who is one of the councilmen, I think, councilwomen,
Yeah.
I guess in that case,
Councilwomen,
one of
yeah.
the patrons, and they're paying for his education and whatnot. And he's doing what he's doing because he was in a horrible, traumatic situation when he was a kid, and his parents lost their lives, and then he was saved by a magic user, and he wanted to see if he could use magic, arcane magic, to save more people, to create prosthetics and defend the city from external attackers and things like that. And it actually, with defensive stuff like shields and and so I really liked him as a character, and I kind of really empathized with his story. And I think if I'd started with his story first, I'd have been a little bit more invested because I would have seen it as his story a little bit more. But instead, it's kind of more Vi's story. And Vi starts out being
just a terrible kid.
She's terrible.
She's awful.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have any reason to like her as a person particularly. And so I don't know. I just have a lot of fatigue for people starting stories with horrible people, And I didn't find much redeeming about her or really her crew. I didn't really care much about. And honestly, it wasn't really until the fourth episode, I think it's the fourth episode, where something happens, which we'll get into in spoilers, I think, but that shakes up the dynamic considerably. That was where I got interested and invested in the story, was only in the middle of the series.
Yeah, it did feel like a 3-episode exposition. Like,
yeah,
we could have knocked that out in one, guys.
Well, interestingly enough, by the way, if you look at not IMDb, but Wiki, which I did because, as I said, I stopped watching it for a few weeks and I had to come back, and I was like, I better revisit like the Wiki of these episodes because I do not remember exactly what happened. So I went to Wiki and I looked at their episode descriptions, and in fact, it's a 9-episode arc, and Wiki and the show explicitly defines episodes 1 through 3 as Act 1, and 4, 5, and 6 as Act 2, and then 7, 8, and 9 as Act 3. So that is accurate to the way that the story is structured. I mean, very clearly, like the end of the 3rd episode, beginning of the 4th episode is the end of Act 1, beginning of Act 2. And that moment was kind of the key moment, I think. But at the same time, it's a bit to get into. I mean,
that was clearly the intent of the show's creators. I just am not convinced that was the best move.
Yeah. Yeah, look, so I had this conversation with somebody last night about what we've been saying, or what I've been saying in particular about Boba Fett, right? Like, and somebody was like, well, you're judging it, but the series isn't over yet. You can't judge the series until you've seen the whole series. I'm like, it's television. I can 100% judge it before the series is over because I need to know whether or not I need to invest 10 hours of my time, 12 hours, 25 hours of my time. Like, I want to know what we're getting into here. And if something is not hooking you from the pilot, basically from the first episode, then for most people, I mean, look, we do what we do for a living. I'm here talking about movies, and that's a big part of my existence at Fee right now and everything else. But like, if I didn't, I would not have continued to watch the show. And in fact, I very nearly didn't continue to watch the show because I got a couple episodes in and I was like, yeah, whatever. It's fine, and then I kind of moved on. But yeah, it's so weird to me to say, like, TV is not a 9-hour movie. And that's what kind of the guy was saying to me last night when I was talking about it. He's like, it's a 9-hour movie. And I'm like, it's not, though. That's not how this works. And episodic storytelling is not, you don't just take a movie and you don't just write a, God, what would it be here? Let me think. How many, here, I'm going to have to do some math here because I don't know, I don't know off the top of my head, but,
like how many
500,
pages
let's say a 540 page screenplay, right? You don't do a 540
Yeah.
page screenplay and then just every 50 pages, you just put a hard stop and then put that up on television. That's not how this works, right? Like, you write individual episodes that are themselves meant to have act 1, act 2, and act 3, and they're supposed to have an A story and a B story. And I'm not saying that, like, they're supposed to have. The point is that you're watching a coherent story inside of a given episode in order to tell a broader arc when you put all of those episodes together, you know? And it's not the same kind of storytelling as if you just, like I said, took a, 540 page screenplay and just sliced it up, you know? And that would be boring, and you would hate it, by the way, because things would just happen, but you'd have barely gotten any exposition for any of the characters. You'd barely know anything about the world in those first 50 pages. And you barely care about anything because you really haven't even gotten into the meat of the story yet. Like, you've got to jump into it. Like, I've got to actually care about this stuff. I'm not going to wait 4 hours before I actually get invested. You know, most people won't, I would say.
Yeah. When I'm watching stuff for myself on those rare occasions that I do that, you know, and it's a show, you get 2 episodes. Mm-hmm. From me. And if it's not done, like, if I'm not hooked in 2 episodes, because I can forgive a weak pilot, that happens. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you one more just to be sure. Well, but if I'm not in it by the end of episode 2,
I'll also give you a 2-part pilot, right? Like, I mean, I think there are a lot of situations where, 1 hour or 1 installment is not enough. And I'm sensitive to the fact that, not so much on Netflix, but sometimes, like, networks especially. Fortunately, this is less and less of a thing, I think. But, like, networks, will mess around with shows in a way that's pretty aggressive. I think a lot about Firefly and what Fox did to Firefly, because, one of the many things that they did wrong, God, there were so many things. I mean, that show was poorly marketed, for one thing, which was its own thing. Yeah. But the worst... There were 2 things that Fox did to really kill that show before it ever had a chance. One was constantly changing what day and time the show was airing on. So I believe it started on Wednesdays. And I remember this because I was in college, and I was like, and, I have no cable. I have no TiVo. There's no streaming. So I saw an ad on broadcast television, and I was like, that looks like a show for me. I would like to watch that show. And I made a note of it. Like, I'm going to have to be here Wednesday at 8 p.m. or whatever it was, And so I did that. And then, like, the next week it was on, like, Thursday or Friday or something. And so there was no consistency to when the show was airing, which was insane. So that was one problem. The other problem is they did it out of order. The show was designed for what was aired as the 3rd episode to be the pilot, the second episode. I'm trying to remember, because I believe they aired the train job first, because they aired the train job first because they thought the train job was the most exciting episode, which, to be fair, it was a pretty exciting episode. However, I didn't know anything about anything at this point. And there's a 2-part pilot that did not get aired first because they thought it was too much exposition and too much stuff from whatever. But it's how you met Mal. It's how you met Zoe. It's how you met, like, all of the characters that mattered. First of all, literally all of them it was how you met all of them. It's also how you got to find out that Mal was in a civil war. And again, this is kind of the comparison to Arcane, was in a civil war fighting what I actually agree was the right side of the Civil War, and lost, right? And so you get to know where he's coming from when you get into the meat of the story. If you don't have that, you're really in trouble for understanding what that. So yeah, no, Fox did everything they could do to kind of mess that up, and I just feel like my point was, I'm forgiving of that kind of stuff, because I get that like, there are things that happen that don't quite. But in this case, I don't know. I didn't hate it, but I wasn't super engaged. And And it kind of took until like the middle of Act 2 for me to be like, oh, okay, there's something more here. But let's get into spoilers real quick, because I want to talk about some of these things. The big thing that changes is that Vi and the rest of the crew go. Their mentor, sort of father figure, gets captured by who kind of becomes the villain of the story. And he's captured, and they go to try to rescue him. Vi tells Powder, who's her little sister, to stay home, basically, because she's not old enough. She's going to get in the way.
Yeah, and also, it's super dangerous.
It's super dangerous.
It's super dangerous.
Yeah.
You know you're not a fighter. Just stay here. We'll be back. We'll be back with Vander.
And by the way, Vi's right. 100% correct. She should have never been anywhere near that. But of course, Powder does not listen to her. And not only does she not listen to her, she decides that she's going to put together like a bomb using these blue orbs that she's found, that she's kept. And then when she goes and tries to rescue everybody herself, and this is the big spoiler, she ends up blowing the entire thing up, including killing a couple of her friends. And, knocking Vi unconscious and, really causing havoc across the board. And when Vi discovers that she is the reason that, a few of their friends are now dead, she yells at Powder. She says, it's been called a jinx prior to this. And she says, you are a jinx. And then, and kind of, storms off, leaving Powder with the bad guy, with Silco is his name. And so Silco ends up kind of becoming a father figure to Powder, who is now going by the alias Jinx. We flash forward a couple years, and Vi's in prison. Jinx is working with Silco. Jace is now on the council, on the city council. The explosion created a lot of ripple effects throughout the story. And that's where, for me, it actually does start to get interesting.
Yeah, it does.
And especially interesting because it really liked the fact that they were willing to kill some of these characters that we, we're like, they weren't major characters, but at the same time, like for me, I was kind of assuming they were going to stick around.
I liked how well they established the stakes of what we were dealing with. I will say that for the first 3 episodes, people die. People go to jail. People get kicked out of school and lose their patronage. Like, things have consequences in this show. And after so much trash that just completely ignores all of that, it was very refreshing to see that, people are paying for their mistakes in this show. And in fairly dramatic fashion. I appreciated that.
Yeah, me too. I think that is what, and that's why, again, I think why that act break for me, and why getting into the second act, I think really shifted my perspective on the show, because it did add stakes. It added clarity to what, I still didn't particularly love Vi or Jinx or many of these other characters. And Jace, honestly, like, Jace becomes a worse character over the course of the show. He becomes, and by the way, this is totally expected if you're me and probably Jen, because, this is a guy who gets a seat on the city council and immediately starts doing what every of the other council members is doing and trying to manage and plan and control the city, and it goes awry. I will say, at the very end, and again, we're deep into spoilers here, at the very I think it's in the last episode, or maybe the second to last episode, Jace brokers a deal. I think it's the last episode. He brokers a deal with Silco. Silco is now basically a terrorist, not only flooding the streets with Shimmer, which is the drug that everybody's using, and this is, there's rampant homelessness and drug abuse and all this kind of stuff, huge problems everywhere. But also Silco himself is using this to fund crime. And I mean, he's just kind of become a horrible influence on the entire city. And so Jace brokers a deal with him to leave him what's called the Zwan, which is the kind of the undercity area. And we'll leave that to him. And then the upper crust area will be separated and they will no longer be under the same jurisdiction. Silco can have that part. The council will continue to have the other part. And it's funny because when he goes and gives the speech to the council, like advocating this idea, which may or may not be a good idea, but like he advocates it on the basis that that the council has been trying for years to plan the city, and they are not fit to rule over these people whose lives that they don't know anything about. Yeah. Which I liked. I thought that was a great it's a great little moment.
Jace's arc is weird to me because he starts out going in the wrong direction, and like it happens pretty quickly. Like he gets his council seat and is like that day brokering sweetheart deals with trade conglomerates and just, you know, all the backroom stuff that happens in government. And it happens so fast. And another thing that I actually appreciated about that show, how the sausage gets made in local governance. So there was that. And then he continues this slide. Like he keeps doing this really dangerous sort of research, and he knows how bad it can go. He knows that these tools that he has designed with the intent to be used to like help mining operations, like he sees how they could be misused and used as weaponry, but like he keeps going. And he knows he shouldn't. He's warned that he shouldn't and acknowledges the wisdom in that, but keeps going.
Yep.
And it's just this slide down until finally he gets to that point where like he learns from his dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
He's like, heck, this is actually like a turbo bad idea, you guys. Like he gets into it. He gets into a fight with these tools that he's created.
Yeah. Well, and not only does he get into a fight, but
he accidentally kills a kid.
Kills a kid. So like
it's tough. It's rough.
And it is dark.
He goes through it. And then he's like, you know what? No. It would have been very, very easy for him to convince himself of his own righteousness here. Like he had all of the tools to do that. And you could make the reasonable argument.
Yeah.
But he's like, no, this is terrible. We're not doing this anymore. Shut it down.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes to end this fight, we're going to do it.
Which is what his own mentor, Heimerdinger, who's a little, I'm not sure what kind of a creature he is.
He's fuzzball.
He's a fuzzball.
With a mustache.
He's a little cat man. I'm not really sure. In any case, I'm trying to remember. Hold on a sec. I'm going to look up something else real quick because there's a comic book series that I like that it's going to take me a minute to figure it out, that has a character that reminds me a lot of this, and I'm trying to remember what they called the thing that looks a lot like this. But anyway, it's a weird whatever. Anyway, Heimerdinger is like the city founder, and he is sort of the head of the science academy and the whole thing. And he's the one constantly. He's like, this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. This is a bad idea.
This is a violation of the ethos.
But I also think that's what's interesting about Heimerdinger is that, and it comes up in the last, kind of in the last episode. Or not the last episode, but the episode where Jace kind of ousts him from the council. He doesn't have any proactive ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a pretty common problem for people. I think it's a common problem for libertarians also. Which is like a whole lot of
also,
like, you just
and
shouldn't.
Also he doesn't explain why this is a bad idea. He's just like, oh, trust me.
Yeah.
Terrible idea. Only bad things will happen. Trust me. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, but like, why?
Yeah.
And he's just kind of relying on his reputation to be like, oh, you got to trust me, bro. Like, no, I don't trust you, you tiny, fuzzy, mustachioed thing.
No, yeah, so absolutely. And why exactly should you? Right? Like, it doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah.
And again, he's not explaining himself, and he's not giving, I mean, he's giving a good enough reason to say that this is a bad idea, but he's not giving a good enough reason to say, like, because again, he's not offering any proactive solutions. So we've still established that, like, the shimmer issue is an issue, and that it's important, and that crime in the city is an issue, and that it's important, and that this growing terrorism problem with Silco is an important issue. All of these things need to be dealt with one way or another. And when all Heimerdinger is saying is like, no, don't do this, but he's not saying, okay, let me give you another alternative answer, you know, then of course he loses, right? And I don't know. I have some, it's kind of interesting to me because I do see this with like libertarians all the time, which myself included, where there are certain things. So I want to split these points into two things. One is there are a lot of cases where there's a little bit of hand waving that says like, okay, so we've got a problem with terrorism. Let's say the Department of Homeland Security is a terrible way to do it. And you go, absolutely, it's a horrible way to do it. We shouldn't do it. So how do we deal with terrorism? And then people are just like, I don't know. Somebody else will figure it out. Well, somebody did figure it out. It was Department of Homeland Security. So like, you're going to have to get in there and try to figure out some alternative if you really want people to be, you know, to be like convinced. Right. Yeah. On the other hand, there are a lot of things, and this is actually a similar example in certain ways. There are a number of things, too, that just get better when you don't do anything. So, you know, take, I don't know, like housing policy that regulates interest rates, for example. Like the actual answer is don't.
Not to.
It's not there. You don't replace it with another agency that does it better. You accept that this is a terrible thing that people can't really do. And you just say the answer is to stop, you know, and this is true for a lot of things. It's like, you know, the death penalty or, you know, the war on drugs, for example. Like the answer to the war on drugs fundamentally is don't do it. And
just don't,
you know, if you've got a problem with drug overdoses and things of that nature, then that's another issue that you need to try to address. But that doesn't mean that the answer to that is going to be something that is horribly counterproductive, like the war on drugs, which frankly, there's plenty of evidence at this point that a lot of things with overdoses and everything else are a product of that, because they're a product of black market interactions. They're a product of, you know, people being in situations where the drugs that they take are extremely unsafe, which are exactly the same things that happened during Prohibition. I mean, it's all the same. But I don't know. It's kind of amusing to me just because Heimerdinger just didn't really persuade anybody. He was just like, don't do it. And then he just had a sad look on his face when he was like, no, don't do it. And then he was off the council and then went off his own way.
It.
So I want to talk about the ending real quick because I feel like they cheated. I feel like the ending, for all we've already talked about the show having some stakes and having interesting arcs for different characters, they really gave themselves an out with this ending. So basically it ends with Vi and Silco and one of the, we didn't talk about her, but one of the cop characters, Caitlin, all around a table, basically, with Jinx trying to figure out who she wants to side with at this point. Does she go back to Vi now that she knows Vi is still alive? Does she stay with Silco? You know,
having a very public mental breakdown.
Oh yeah, Jinx is not well.
She's not stable.
Not at
people.
all.
She
not a bit.
And I don't want to use this term lightly, but she is crazy. She is absolutely off her rocker and unhinged. These are not words that I use very frequently, and Sean can back me up on that one. Be like, you misguided. This is not, a healthy attitude.
No.
When I say she's crazy, she is an absolute lunatic and really should be in an institution somewhere.
But also, I got to say that's look, I'm talking myself into liking the show more as we talk about this because that's story driven. I mean, her insanity. She wasn't the brightest of kids when she was little, but she directly killed two of her best friends, you know, and they now sort of literally haunt her. And indirectly
her like foster dad.
Oh yeah. She hurt her foster dad. She got her sister arrested. I mean, all these kinds of, effectively, like, she was the cause of the dissolution of her entire family. And, for whatever that kind of adoptive family means to her. And they're ghosts that are literally in her mind all the time. Like, you can see them attached to her back as she is going through her little moments of cracked, insanity. And anyway, so what she ends up doing, though, is she ends up picking up basically a rocket launcher and firing it at the basically demonstrating once and for all that she is in fact going to be the evil. She's choosing evil, basically. And she chose violence. She chose violence, and so she launches a rocket directly at the city council chambers, which is like across the bay or whatever from where she's sitting, and it happens. It's being launched right at the moment that the city councilmen are debating to go with Jace's brokered deal with Silco.
I think they had literally just voted to go along with Jace's.
They just voted to go along with it. But the reason I say that the show is cheating is because the rocket, basically, you can see the reflection of the rocket as it cracks through the window, and then it cuts to black.
And then that's it.
Which is like, season. There's a lot of ways out of that. If you want to save all those councilmen, there's a lot of ways out. But I think it's cheating. I feel like they should have just blown the whole thing up. But then you would lose Jace, you'd lose Mel, you'd lose a couple of the other councilmen. I mean, most of these people you don't particularly care about, but like Jace and Mel you care about, and you'd lose them. I don't know. Just feel like it was like a little bit of a hedge right at the end,
like there. A little bit, so that they could do some audience polling to see how they feel about all of the characters.
Yeah, and who are you going to bring back, right?
Yeah,
do it like Death in the Family, the Batman, Jason Todd thing. I don't know if you're familiar with that story or not.
Not. I mean, ish.
So Jason Todd was one of the Robins. It's one of the notorious, individuals who Batman trained as a small child. And the audience hated him. Like, comic readers absolutely hated him. So DC gave audiences there's a story arc where he gets captured by the Joker. And they gave audiences the opportunity to vote on whether or not he lives or dies. And they voted. And he did not survive. So I feel like we're doing that, but a little bit more clandestine. They're probably looking at polling. They're probably looking at
they're looking at all of the commentary,
comments
on Reddit or whatever.
Yep, I bet they are. But all right, let's wrap up our discussion of Arcane. Jen, give me your sort of final thoughts and give me a star rating.
Okay, my final thoughts on this movie. I know that I've had some pointed criticism about some of the aspects of the show, but I do want to emphasize the fact that it was good. Like, it was an enjoyable show. And especially since I just binged it over 2 days. And it had, for all that I didn't like Vi and Co at the beginning of this show, they were at least interesting characters. They had something to them, even if I didn't necessarily like that thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I haven't seen storytelling like this in like a really popular TV show in a really long time. And they did have all of the decisions make sense. They did have one thing leading to another. There was cause and effect, and there was stakes, and there were consequences. And this was actually a really good show, and it had something to say about the dangers of technology and the hazards of concentrated power, and trying to plan the lives of people that you don't have the first idea about what they value and what they think and what they feel. Like, there were some really interesting things in the show, and I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm looking forward to season 2 and give this 3/4 of a star.
Nice. I agree with pretty much all of that. I think it was ultimately a very well written show and a generally very well executed show. I've got a handful of quibbles. I don't particularly care for a lot of the montages. I particularly thought that, look, some of this stuff is going to get dated because they're using very current music, and so that stuff is gonna be hard to rewatch in a couple years because a lot of that stuff is going to be very specific. But It was very well written. The characters acted from motivations that were established and clear, and something that I understood as a viewer. The story did not try to, certainly not visibly, try to tack on stuff from the writers' politics or any of that kind of stuff. Like, none of that is there's no do better speeches in this, right? So there's a lot of the things that we've talked about a lot of times over the course of the last several episodes of the show that are traps that this show avoids really well. Its art style is pretty interesting. What I would like, because I think I'm going to give this, I think I'll give it 3/4 of a star as well. But what I would like to see is something with this level of attentiveness to storytelling and craft, and this level of sort of interestingness of its design and animation style, but with centered around a heroic character that I care about and think is good.
Wait, we already have that though, Sean.
Do we?
Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh, we do. Into the yes, except for I want to see it with an original character.
Okay, fair.
And I want to see it, well, and also what I'm talking about to some extent, I mean, I'm down for more, fantasy, magic, steampunk.
Yeah.
I'm down
I think
for
this does have some really cool potential for fantasy series that we're not relying on overblown CGI and just nonsense like that.
To that point, by the way, I think that just the nature of the Arcane world, the continent that we haven't seen, I think it's big enough to offer opportunities for multiple series featuring different kinds of characters with different kinds of tones.
I think you're right.
And
that would be really interesting to see.
And it would still be a world
Netflix?
Yeah, right. I mean, they're probably not, but they should be.
No. But they can have that one for free if they are.
They can, and they should, because I do not have the power to make that. So Anyway, I'd be interested in that because I'd love to see, and then of course you can MCU it eventually. You can bring everybody together in one thing. So that's how I feel about it. But all right, so let's wrap it up here. Arcane, not bad. Pretty good, actually. Pretty good. If you're a fan of the show and you are not currently a patron or a Subscribe Star supporter, you might want to consider giving us a couple bucks a month. It's helps us out a whole lot. but also it's something that will get you access to our special bonus episode, which we'll be doing right after this for anybody who's already signed up on patreon.com/outoframeshow or subscribestar.com/outoframeshow. But if you're not quite ready to do that, that's totally okay. We've got Discord, we've got an email list, we've got the Out of Frame YouTube channel that you should definitely subscribe to. One thing I will say is if you're watching this and you're not a subscriber, do us a favor and leave us a review and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast app, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is. I think that'll help us. We want to start trying to grow the podcast audience a little bit more this year, and those ratings are really helpful. So please do that. In the meantime, for everybody else who is going to stick around and join us for some after show talk. But for everybody, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.